Alright, so today we're gonna go over the proposed balance update for the multiplayer version of StarCraft 2. And before you click away, because I know some of you are watching this and you think that you've already seen this video, this is an update, a follow-up to a previous balance update video that I made about 2 weeks ago. I will go over the announced changes once again briefly, but if you want to hear my full thoughts, I'll go ahead and post a link to that previous video down below in the description of this one. Alrighty, so here we are. This was posted on the Battle.net forums just a couple of hours ago. The StarCraft 2 balance team announced the following. Hey all! 2 weeks ago, we announced our plans to propose and test 2 separate sets of possible changes for the next big Versus patch. Since our last community update, we've gotten a great deal of constructive feedback from the fruitful community discussions. Sorry, I just have to stop for a little bit. This is, if you go on like Team Liquid or you go on Reddit, yes, not gonna lie, there are some people that have some fruitful discussions, but you know the naysayers, right? There's some people that get very angry whenever there's any announced balance changes whatsoever. But good feedback, constructive feedback from the fruitful community discussions around the first set of changes proposed. We are now ready to introduce proposal number 2, which will replace proposal number 1 in the testing tab later today. Partly because of the generally positive feedback, both possible iterations of the next patch will include the following. Okay. So essentially, this set of changes right here is, I think, pretty much as good as guaranteed to go live. I mean, obviously, anything here is subject to change, but considering they're sticking around on some and they're removing some of the previously announced changes, I think it's safe to assume at the very least that these changes are going to make it through. So quickly, I want to go over each and every one of them once again. So first off, we have Stimpack. Upgrade research duration reduced from 121 to 100 seconds. That is 21 seconds in total shaved off of the Stimpack upgrade, which is probably one of the strongest upgrades, if not the strongest upgrade in the game. This is primarily done with the Terran versus Protoss matchup in mind. Right now, Protoss players have a very easy time taking a third base, and Terran players in general don't really have a proper way to punish it. Maybe this is gonna open up the opportunity for Terrans to go back into like 3-1-1 openers and things like that. I think this is a really cool change that's gonna open up once again some possibilities. Also, the chances of your Stimpack upgrade rather getting sniped are gonna go down significantly. For the Terran versus Zerg matchup, people have been doing some testing, and while it's a 21-second reduction on the Stimpack timing, the 60 Marine timing attack that a lot of the Terran players like to go for in the matchup is not so much reliant on the upgrade timing of Stimpack, but more so on the first 2 Medivacs coming out. So with perfect execution, apparently right now you can shave about 5 seconds off of the 16 Marine drop, which I don't think will be very impactful whatsoever. The scariest thing for Terran versus Zerg, and this is something that I didn't actually address in the previous one, but that I found out myself, but the scariest thing about this change is not so much the Stimpack, but the fact that Combat Shield will come the full 21 seconds earlier as a follow-up push. I think in general though, this is definitely a good change and I like it a lot. Secondly, we have another big one. New upgrade enhanced shockwaves. Increases the radius of the Ghost EMP round from 1.5 to 2. The cost is 150 and the research time is 79 seconds. So this is obviously a late game upgrade for Ghosts, especially meant I think for the Terran versus Protoss matchup, but it will also help out in Terran versus Zerg for sure. If I did the math correctly, the radius is increased here with about 75%, which is very, very significant. And also something that I did not touch upon in the previous video that I made is that this effectively increases the range as well for some of these ghosts, because they're going to have an easier time walking forward and EMPing some of the units, because obviously it has more range in the first place. And it might make it easier for the ghosts to actually get into the right spot to prevent themselves from getting like feedback from those High Templar that they're trying to EMP. So in general, this is an extremely powerful upgrade that I think is actually maybe even a little bit too strong, but I'm curious to see how this is going to play out. And I think in general, it's a cool thing to try out at the very least, right? Since it is 150, it's not a cheap upgrade by any stretch of the imagination, and it's also actually a pretty long research time. So this is not something that we will really see coming into play until maybe, maybe 15, maybe 12-ish minutes after the game starts. So definitely not something I think that anyone will rush out. Although it is going to make it much easier, especially for Terrans in the Terran versus Protoss matchup, to like blanket the whole Protoss army and remove their shields as like instant damage. But anyways, we'll see what this one is going to play out. Next one that we have as well is the Carrier Interceptor build time decreased from 11 to 9. Carriers right now at the highest level of play are considered to be close to useless. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but pretty much all of the Protoss players say that you know, the unit is just simply not something you really want to play right now, primarily also because of the Infested, and we'll come back to that in just a little bit. But Interceptor build time decreased from 11 to 9. It used to be 6 seconds back in the day. I think they over-nerfed it then, so going from 11 to 9 seems like a very logical choice. And then the last one, this is also a very significant nerf to the Protoss once again. The Nexus, well, I mean, we'll go over some more changes, okay? I say once again, but the previous one had some other changes that actually were quite painful for Protoss as well, but some of those have been changed. The Nexus strategic recall cooldown increased from 85 to 130 seconds. So this will mean that Protoss is going to have to be a little bit more cautious with where they are positioning their units. I don't think any of the top tier Protoss players are going to be all too bothered by this, but obviously it's very significant. If you're not in position when a Terran, you know, boosts in a couple of medevacts, right? If you're not in position right then and you need to recall, be aware that you're not going to be able to do it every single time a dropship arrives. Next up, we have one that's being changed. So, in addition, we saw a bug report circulating around various community forums describing how the Infested Terran's Infested Rockets weapon ignores armor. We plan to roll out a fix for this along with the upcoming patch, but since this bug fix has a similar effect to our initially proposed Infested Rockets change, we'll be replacing that change with this bug fix. So Infested Terrans, Infested Rockets will no longer ignore armor. So this is a bug fix that's very similar to the previous one, even a little bit stronger, I think, because obviously +3 armor. It's not as you know, it's gonna reduce the attack damage for the air units that they are targeting by -3, which is obviously stronger than the previously announced nerf to the Infested Terrans, but I think this is very fair and it makes a lot of sense because we'll talk about this a little bit more in a bit, but I think in general right now, Infestors are just a little bit too well-rounded. Okay, now there's also a couple of changes that are being removed. For Proposal 2, we'll be including the above changes, but removing our most experimental change involving the Warp Prism warp-in speed. So these two changes right here are being removed. First off, we have the Warp Prism no longer start with the Warp Conduit passive ability, and Warp-ins will take 11 seconds when not near a Warp Gate or Nexus, up from 4. And Gravitic Drive upgrade now has the added functionality of granting Warp Prisms the Warp Conduit passive ability, reducing Warp-in time from 11 to 4. Now, I personally didn't mind this upgrade so much, but I was a little bit worried and skeptical about it because it might remove some of the 2-base possibilities that Protoss can go for, specifically in the Protoss versus Zerg matchup. There's no denying that 2-base all-ins right now are extremely common and they are very, very strong. And, you know, they basically, with this previous announced set of changes, right, they are basically forcing Protoss players to go up towards the Robotics Bay, and it just simply shuts down a lot of the 2-base aggression that Protoss can go for in the first place. So, though this change is a significant redesign, it does a good job at addressing multiple issues in one condensed stroke. Some of these issues include the strength and variety of Protoss all-ins in PvZ, the harassment strength of Warp Prisms, and the overall power level of Protoss. In its stead, we'd like to make the following addition with Proposal number 2. So once again, these changes right here will be added to the next set of changes. The bug fix right here that will make Infested Terrans deal less damage is also going to be added. These that were previously announced are going to be removed. And then there's a couple right here that are being added to it. All right. So should we actually go over the Warp Prism one first? I think that makes more sense. There's two changes right here that they're making to the Warp Prism. We'll come back to the Overlord change here in just a little bit. So first off, the Warp Prism cost increased from 200 to 250 minerals. The Warp Prism is perceived as a powerful unit with a lot of utility, providing both harassment and all-in opportunities. We believe this cost increase will be more accurately reflecting the unit's power level. Fair enough. And the Warp Prism pickup range decreased from 6 to 5. This is obviously the bigger change. We view Warp Prism ranged pickups as one of the more positive additions to Legacy of the Void. It provides for many skill-testing micro-opportunities, encourages Protoss to poke at their opponents without overly committing their army, and allows top players the ability to distinguish themselves. On the other hand, the large pickup range can be frustrating to play against and contributes to the potency of immortal lanes. As such, we think there is room to adjust the opponent's ability to interact with the Prism and the level of risk the Prism must put itself in while it juggles its cargo. Our primary concern with the suggested change in the current landscape is that it could potentially impact PvZ macro openings more than it would PvZ all-in openings. So I think we can all agree, right? I've been making some jokes about it over the last few months while giving commentary to some of the games as well, but I think we can all agree that the Warp Prism right now is definitely the best Protoss unit in the game. if not the very best unit in StarCraft 2. I mean, that's going to be a toss-up, in my opinion, between like the Queen, the Marine, and then the Prism. Maybe the High Templar should be added to that mix as well, but Warp Prisms have just insane utility, and they come out pretty early on as well, effectively giving all of the Protoss units in the early game blink, and then obviously allowing them a safe transport if there is no proper air or anti-air available for the opponent. So I think in general, Warp Prisms are just a little bit too strong. Effectively speaking, this pickup range decrease is going to obviously shut down a lot of the early game pressure that Protoss can effectively go all in with. So, for example, we've been seeing a lot of 2-base all-ins where they go for a couple Immortals and a Prism and then a lot of Zealots. We'll go over a Zealot change here in a little bit too. All of those builds will be a little bit weaker, but it's gonna still allow Protoss to go for like the Dark Templar into Archons, and they can continue juggling them around. It's just gonna be a little bit riskier because you do have to extend your Prism a little bit further, meaning that you either are gonna lose it to, say, for example, Queens, or you're gonna obviously, you know, have to commit a little bit less frequently and just go out a little bit faster. I think this makes a lot of sense. The straight up increase right there of the Warp Prism cost from 200 to 250 minerals, I think that is fair as well. This is going to effectively reduce the cost, or increase the cost obviously by 1 probe and I guess half a Zealot. Not very significant, but I do think it's going to reflect the unit's power level a little bit better. I do agree with that. I'm very glad that they've decided not to add gas to it. I think if this was going to cost Vespian gas as well, that would throw a ton of Protoss builds completely out of the window. Even if it's just going to be a little bit, it would mess up so many of the strategies. This is a relatively minor change right here that I think will just slow down every push just ever so slightly, right? It's going to be like a couple of additional seconds that are going to actually help out as well with the previous change that we'll go over in just a second. And I think this right here is actually very good. So this right here is just a straight up nerf rather than a redesign, which was previously proposed. And I think I actually, after thinking about it for a little bit, I think I actually like this one better. I think this one is more fair, and it's not gonna prevent Protoss from going for 2-base all-ins. It's just gonna make everything ever so slightly weaker, and it's gonna make, I guess, the pickup juggling especially a little bit weaker as well, but top level pros are still going to be able to pull that off just fine. It's just that you're going to have to pull away a little bit quicker if you don't want to lose it to, say, for example, units that can, you know, shoot up, especially Queens, I guess. All right. Now, because the Warp Prism cost right here is increased a little bit as well, we have another change here that I think is very impactful. So this doesn't sound very significant. I know all of these changes sound very, very small, and it's really only going to come into play at high level, I suppose. So for Zerg, Overlord Pneumatized Carapace upgrade research cost decreased from 100 minerals and 100 gas to 75 minerals and 75 gas. Doesn't sound very significant, but I'll try and explain to you why I think this is going to be huge. So we hope this change will address the difficulty Zerg has in the early game when scouting their Protoss opponent. Specifically, their ability to differentiate between tech choices and the various Immortal-based timings. In our initial feedback from professional players, we heard varied opinions regarding the efficacy of this change, so we want to be very careful that the Overlord speed openings don't become omnipresent in either ZVT or ZVP. Would that really be such an issue? I'm not entirely sure, but anyways. Okay, so let me try and explain why this is a big deal. So, I want to talk specifically about the Zerg versus Protoss matchup. I think in ZVT this is not going to be that big of a deal. In ZVZ it's not going to be that relevant either, but I think it's going to be pretty huge in the Zerg versus Protoss one. Now keep in mind, I'm a Zerg player at heart myself. I do try and play a lot of Protoss and Terran as well, but I do play more Zerg than the others, so maybe I'm going to be a little bit biased. But let me try and explain myself and why I think this is a great change. So when it comes to Protoss 2-base all-ins, there's a wide variety of strategies they can go for. Most of them are based around the amount of probes that Protoss can go for. So some of them, for example, will take 16 probes in each of the mineral lines and then 3 probes in each of the 4 gas geysers. So that's a 44 probe all-in. Usually those builds are going to be based around like Sentry, Immortal, Zealots with charge, and maybe even +1 attack, right? They're going to be a little bit more of like a sophisticated unit composition. Then there's going to be builds that only require 3 gases, where Protoss will cut a couple of probes and hit a little bit sooner and go for, you know, maybe like Shaded Adepts or, you know, not very popular right now, but like Stalkers or, you know, basically there's like different varieties of builds. And then there's also builds that only require 32 probes. And this is the one that I personally struggle with quite a bit myself. So 32 probe all-ins basically means that Protoss will go for 1 or 2 gases, mine just enough gas to get themselves the Twilight Council, the charge upgrade, and also the Warp Prism out, and then they will pull the probes out of gas and send them back to minerals. So what that means is that that push will hit significantly earlier than the 44 probe all-in, and they're gonna go for just mass Zealot, right? They will go for like 8-gate Zealot, maybe some adepts, right? There's some variety here once again as well, but that's a push that will hit significantly sooner. Now, yes, this is the argument that people make on the live stream all the time whenever I complain about this, whenever I lose to like an 8-gate Zealot 2-base all-in. Yes, you can technically scout this if you go for the Overlord speed at 100, as it is right now. It's just that you scout it and then you will know, okay, I'm gonna die. You invested the resources to go for 100 minerals and 100 gas into Overlord speed, and yes, you will see that you're gonna die and you're gonna lose that game, but you don't have anything to respond anymore at that point because it's just a little bit too expensive. Getting yourself that scouting information is huge, obviously, but if you don't have any time then anymore to respond, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So the fact that it's going to be 75 gas, I think is going to be huge. It's going to make it significantly easier for Zerg players to pull this off. Obviously, that also means if you do end up scouting, for example, like a 32 probe all-in, and you can scout so by usually checking out the gases. If you know that that is going to be the case, right? If you're going to have to go up against a very gateway-heavy army, that's going to be 25 gas right now that you save to go for a Bailing Nest. I think this is huge. If they want to like scale it back a little bit, they could make it like 100 minerals and 75 gas. I think that alone would already be very significant as well. Obviously, it's not going to look as clean, but if they want to make it not as omnipresent, I guess, in all of the matchups very quickly, which I don't really see as big of that big of an issue. But I think if they want to do that, 175 would be very, very good as well. Yeah, so that's kind of my reasoning behind it. And I do think that it's going to be a very good opener, once again, to differentiate between the different tech choices. Right now, what a lot of Zerg players will simply do is try and play overly safe, right? They might like sacrifice it on Overlord to cross your fingers and, you know, hope you're going to scout your opponent's bases properly. But the only way to get reliable scouting information is to either get a Zergling in, which takes a misplay from the Protoss, so that's not very reliable and not very common. Or you can go for Overlord speed, but then if it's a 32 probe all-in, like 8-gate Zealots with charge, you just simply die. So like, it doesn't really make that much sense anymore to go for Overlord speed right now, because you will oftentimes just find yourself in a lot of trouble because you invested into that 100 cost early on, and it's going to make it difficult to hold any kind of follow-up push then from Protoss, even though you know it's coming. Responding in time is hard. So I do strongly feel that this is a really good change, and I think it's actually very, very nice. Combined, obviously, with these changes over here as well, it's going to make things a little bit easier for Zerg, and it's going to make Protoss 2-base all-ins less powerful, but certainly not weak. Now, there's one more right here that I think is very significant as well, and one that I've actually been asking for quite some time myself. I think this is going to be a big improvement for the Protoss versus Zerg matchup, but also for Protoss versus Terran, especially in the mid game, as well as late game Zealot Warp-ins inside of the main. So Zealot Charge, additional impact damage decreased from 8 to 0. After researching Charge, Zealots will still retain the ability to always hit a fleeting target at least once. So a lot of people don't even know that this is a thing in the game. I mean, I've talked about this over at the live stream. I've talked about this rather over at the live stream. Basically, the way it works right now, right? Okay, let me give you the best example, right? This is a Marine right over here, and this is a Zealot, right? So the Zealot Charge is at the Marine. It deals 8 damage on impact. That's something a lot of people are not aware of. And then it hits twice, right? So it like... This is my Zealot oh my god, don't turn that into a GIF, whatever. It hits twice, immediately on top of that impact damage as well. Meaning that most of the damage from Charge comes when the Zealot first arrives. And I've always kind of felt like it was a little bit too much, and it's just a little bit too A-movie, right? I think we've all had those games where like a Prism goes into your main base and they just simply warp in a very healthy amount of those Zealots, and then you find yourself in a lot of trouble because all your structures die because everything gets charged at. This is going to make the charge obviously a little bit weaker, certainly not useless, because you obviously still will at the very least manage to hit once apparently, which is fair enough. It's just going to make it a little bit weaker, and I think it's also going to make it much easier for Terran players to manage the mid game against Protoss, especially when trying to retreat. I think this makes a lot of sense. So Zealots contribute greatly to the power level of Protoss in all matchups. Power level? Vegeta, what does the scouter say about his power level? Sorry. Whether they're used in direct engagements or as part of a harassment. I can't read that and not think of Dragon Ball Z. But anyways, harassment role in combination with Warp Prisms. In both these roles, we believe Zealots might be slightly too powerful relative to their costs and the control required to use them. Yes, especially this, right? I mean, you can still micro and pull them back, I guess, but for the most part, it's just attack moving. Our intention with this change is both to lower the frontal power of Protoss' army and to slightly diminish the strength of Zealot harassment through the early game. Or throughout the early game, rather. In PvZ, this change will also allow unupgraded Zerglings the ability to take additional hits from charge slots without +1 ground weapons, allowing them to be more resilient to charge-based timings, including popular ones that involve Immortals. It would also restore the relationship between weapon-upgraded Zealots and carapace upgraded Zerglings, an interaction that dates back to the original StarCraft. Our proposed rationale for breaking apart all the aforementioned changes in proposal number 2 from proposal number 1 is that we believe they represent two distinct approaches to addressing many of the same issues. I agree. For the charge change specifically, we believe not only that it has overlap with the Prism warp-in speed change, but the severity of both changes combined would also be too extreme for a mid-year balance patch. No, I 100% agree. As this change is one to core Protoss units that is, or rather, as this change is one to a core Protoss unit that is used at all phases of the game and all matchup, we plan to be extra attentive to how this plays. If it does end up going live, we'll careful monitor. Is that correct English? We'll careful monitor just how significantly each Protoss matchup changes in their respective mid-games. Alright, so I think in general, this is a really good set of balance changes, and I'm very happy with the direction that they are taking. So once again, we get a Stimpack buff, a new upgrade for the Ghost. Carriers will have their Interceptor build time decreased. The next strategic recall is just simply going to be on a much longer cooldown. Infested Terrans will deal less damage if a unit has a bunch of armor. Warp Prisms, rather, will, I guess, gotta go down. They will have their cost increased and their pickup range decreased. Overlord Normatized Carapace is now 75-75 instead of 100-100. And the Zealot Charge will not deal any additional damage on impact, other than, of course, the slicing that it does when it arrives at the target. So I think in general, these changes kind of hit the nail on the head. I think they're actually very, very good. Now, obviously, there is no telling how they exactly will play out. It's just that I'm looking at these changes, and I'm wondering exactly what the plan for Protoss is going to be throughout the mid and then the late game as well. The thing is, Protoss is by no means weak, but it does feel, right? And you feel free to correct me in the comment section if you think I'm wrong. But it feels like to me, if a Terran player plays perfectly, or as close to perfectly as possible, right? And a Protoss player plays as close to perfect as possible as well. The same for like Zerg versus Protoss. If the Zerg plays nearly perfectly, and the Protoss plays nearly perfectly as well, it's pretty much always the Zerg and the Terran that will end up winning. And I don't really know exactly why that is. I've been thinking about it quite a bit. For example, in Protoss vs Zerg, I was recently watching Cyril absolutely dismantle late game Protoss. He makes it look very easy, and he makes it look that Zerg is extremely overpowered in the late game almost. I'm not entirely sure what the fix to that one is. I think one of the potential changes that they might want to look into as well, and I do realize right here that the Infested Terrans are being nerfed rather, but I think one of the changes they might want to look into as well is reverting the change to Neuroparasite. So Neuroparasite used to be 7 range for a very long time, and then they put it back up to 9 ranged right now. I think they probably want to put it back to 7. I think if they revert that one back, it's going to be, at the very least, not going to be as Infestor focused in the late game, especially in the Protoss versus Zerg matchup. I think that's going to be it's going to make it a little bit easier for Protoss players to stay alive at that point in the game. The thing is, though, if you decide to go ahead and do so, right, and you decide to go ahead and do exactly that, once again, there's a good chance that Protoss players will try and sit back for the majority of the game and just create that one that beats everything Death Ball kind of army, right? So there's this very delicate balance between like the Protoss Death Ball and then nerfing the Infestor. And I don't really know exactly where this is going to go. Now, I do agree that for the time being, these changes are very good. but we might want to have to look into additional changes if this turns out to not be enough. Now, only time will tell, obviously. I wouldn't be a big fan if they decided to like both nerf the Infested Terran and then also the Neuroparasite in one patch. I feel like that would be a little bit much. So, you know, I think it is something that we at the very least want to keep an eye out on. So the late game Zerg versus Protoss matchup is not just going to be Zerg with 1 million Infestors and then, you know, a lot of Spore Crawlers set up all over the map, which is what it seems to be right now. Broodlord Infestor, once again, is back in action, and it's very, very strong. So late game Protoss, I'm a little bit worried about. Overall, though, I like where these changes are headed, and I guess we'll have to see what it's going to look like here in the future. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if we're going to need, like, maybe a little bit of a buff across the board. Because when you think about it right now, right? Nexus Recall being nerfed, Warp Prism being nerfed, all of the Protoss attacks, therefore, are being nerfed pretty much as well. The Zealot Charge being nerfed, but you guys got 2 extra seconds off of your Interceptor build time. I feel like it's, yeah, since Protoss doesn't seem to be overperforming necessarily in tournaments either, I feel like this might be a little bit much. I like these changes on the whole, but I wonder if not maybe Protoss needs something, right? Protoss might need a little bit of something that goes back into the game to, at the very least, open up some new opportunities rather than just nerfs across the board. Nobody likes getting nerfed, right? I mean, we don't mind taking our toys away if we get given new toys at the same time as well. Right now, it kind of feels like, hey, you get 2 like, remember that one time you had 4 interceptors on your carrier? Now you're gonna have 5. It's like, you know, like, it's not gonna be that significant. So we'll see where things are gonna settle over the next couple of weeks. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section of this video. For now, though, I want to thank you very much so for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile, alright? And I will see you once again tomorrow for another video.